Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a software review, my first software review if I remember correctly. I'm going to be reviewing the Dehancer 7 Pro OFX plugin for Davinci Resolve 18 to make your footage look a little bit like this. Alright, to preface this a little bit, at the time of this recording I only have 760 or so subscribers, so I'm not sure how far this reach is gonna go. If this video helps me, yeah, maybe it'll help me, but if this video helps you, let me know down below. I'm really not sure how far this is gonna grasp, but Dehancer reached out to me anyway after seeing some of my work on Instagram and some of my YouTube videos. I don't know if they know how I feel about plugins, and how I feel about plugins is I usually feel like they're not worth the money because they aren't operating outside of the boundaries that the program that you're using can already operate anyway, such as Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, Davinci Resolve. They all operate within the boundaries of that program. They just make your life a little bit easier and less of a headache, and oftentimes we pay a lot of money to get those plugins to do things that we can already do anyway, but it's just like a shortcut. So, with that being said, they did not pay me to do this review. I'm doing it for them, but they are not seeing it until I post it. So they'll be seeing it at the same time you guys are, and I'm going to give them my honest opinion. I'm going to give everyone my honest opinion, not just them. But that's what this video is all about. Whether or not the Dehancer 7 Pro plugin, there's too many D's there, is worth it for an average YouTuber like myself, or someone that just does primarily photos and then videos about taking photos. Whether or not it streamlines your workflow, helps you, hurts you, whatever. I'm going to dive into it today, and then I'll let you know how I feel about it in the end. So before we jump in, I want to say that I'm going to be doing everything in one single node in Davinci Resolve. That is because it's the easiest to replicate. For anyone that's watching this video, they will be able to do exactly what I'm doing and replicate the exact results. Now, this is not a tutorial, it is a review. I'm going to go through every one of the different features in the OFX plugin and reviewing each one of them with like 1 to 5 stars, let's say. I just pulled that up, but let's do that. Let's give each one a 5-star rating, and then we'll go from there. So they do recommend putting your primary corrections in front of nodes in front of it, so like your white balance, your exposure, everything. But you can do everything in the one plugin. It is not recommended unless you're trying to work through something really fast, and it does work. But for consistency's sake and making it easy to replicate, I will be doing it in just one node. So now let's get in and see what we're working with. Davinci Resolve 18. I've got Dehancer Pro 7 installed, and I'm just going to head and drag this right onto the node. I'm going to be using a single node and a single clip for this review, and right off the bat I can tell you there's something I don't like. They get 3 stars for this because it does show you a little bit of what your image is going to look like, but I don't want that. And I found that you can go down here to the bottom and click disable all tools, and it gives you your similar log profile, and that's how I would prefer that it starts out, but it doesn't. Anyway, we're going to start with the input transform. Now, those of you who are familiar with color space transform, this is pretty similar, only it's built specifically to help you with Dehancer. So this is going to help put your footage into a Rec 709 profile that's better suited to work with the Dehancer features. Okay, so I shot this on a Fujifilm. So I'm going to go to choose camera, vendor, Fujifilm. It detected it was XH2S with F-Log. That is not correct. It was F-Log 2. Everything else is correct. And as you can see, that looks pretty good. So here we are with it on, Rec 709 correction off. Back to Rec 709. Now, if you wanted to stop there, you can. I'm not going to, but I think it looks that good. And anyway, I'm going to give them props. They get 5 stars for this because Davinci, at the time of this video, does not have a color space transform for F-Log2. So this, I find this pretty helpful. It helps me in my grading process so that I don't have to correct a lot first before applying a look. And then of course, we've got some regular adjustments here that we'll get to in a minute. But so far, input transform, 5 stars. All right, next is the film profile. So they have 63 different film profiles here. 5 of them, or maybe more, let's see here, 1, 2. So Fuji Eterna Vivid 500 and the Reala 500D are motion picture film stock, so like movie film. And then we have Kodak as well. We got the Kodak Vision. We got 4 of those. So there's 6. There are 6 that are specific to video. The rest of them are specific to 35 millimeter film stock, or I guess medium format as well, film stock for stills. And they recommend that you sort of follow a certain process, which I'll get to in a minute. But this is really nice. You can select any of these after you enable it, and it shows you a real-time preview of what it looks like, which I think is great. A lot of these look really good. And it's honestly, it's kind of hard to decide which one to choose. And so I really don't know. Let's just look through here. I am a big fan of this. I use this a lot in my 35 millimeter cameras. But let's just scroll through. I will tell you, one of the ones that I'm really liking, especially for video, are actually the Kodak Vision. This was really shot, it was really bright outside, so I'm gonna go with 50D, which is the film sensitivity, and I think that looks pretty good. So let's just go with that. Now we can push and pull that a little bit, and all this does is it sort of mimics the exposure value. Like when you're shooting film at 24 frames per second, not every single frame is going to get the exact same amount of light. So sometimes there's a little bit of inconsistencies, and this kind of allows you to fix it to a certain range of tonal contrast based on how much light the film would have received, which is pretty clever. Not completely necessary, but it does make some adjustments here that look pretty good. I'm going to leave it about right there, and I think that looks good. All right, so the next one I'm going to talk to you about is the print. So if you look here, you've got this linear profile, and Dehancer recommends that you sort of follow suit. So because I chose Kodak Vision 50D, they suggest that you use Fujifilm 3513 or Kodak 2383 print film, because those are motion picture print films. What that means is it basically means that you could have shot a film on multiple different kinds of film, and then when you're done editing it, cutting it, splicing it together, you have this reel of film that has splices and all that kind of stuff. You transfer it through a process of using like what they call film lights and things that I'm not going to get into, to a fresh reel of film that was usually one of these two. These two were the most popular, and that was your final delivery. You replicated those, and then you sent it out to all the movie theaters across the world, and that's how they saw your movie. So if you're using a film emulation that was meant for motion pictures, they suggest using one of these two. And, rightfully so, if you're a purist, this is kind of what it would look like. However, they do encourage experimentation, so if you want to mix and match, if it looks good to you, why not? It's your movie, it's your video, go ahead, do what you want. But for this particular clip, I am going to go with the 3513 because I think the color profile of it actually fits the kind of vibe that I was going for with this clip, and so I'm going to use that. And then we can adjust a little bit of what the properties of this film would have been. And that's basically, so if you want to just do a final adjustment, or what would have been a final adjustment here, it's not a final adjustment for us, but you can do that here. So you can change the white point a little bit, maybe bring it down a little bit so your highlights aren't so blown out, maybe change your exposure, bring it down, tonal contrast. These are all things that you guys probably already know about and use in Lightroom and other things like that. So I'm not going to go too far into it other than the analog range limiter. If you look down here at the scopes, the waveform, you can see it compress a little bit. That's because it is really trying to fit all of your data within the bounds of what film would have been restricted to at the time. Now, you don't have to use it. I'm not going to. But it is an option there if you are a purist. And I personally just like the colors of the film, so I still like the crispy digital image, and I don't really prefer to make it look like it was shot on film 100%. I'm mostly here for the colors. Alright, so next we're going to go on to, I think I forgot to rate those last two. 5 stars for each of them because they do a really good job of making colors and making this look fantastic. Next we go to Film Developer. So Film Developer is at its heart the same thing that you would have in a darkroom. Some minor corrections that you could do. Even today, if you print or want to take some of your film to be developed, you can tell the lab, hey, I would like a little bit of contrast boost or things like that. You can write it on the film if you want to, or sometimes you can just get a photo back and you get the negative back and you find the one you want and you say, hey, you know what, I like this photo, but I think it needs a little bit more contrast. Can you help me? And you take it back and they redevelop that particular shot. This is sort of mimicking that process, so you can boost your contrast. I'm actually going to pull it down because I want to see some more details in the dark areas, not too much. Now the gamma correction depends on the contrast boost. So how much value you set this one is going to move in correspondence, and I'll example that here. So I turn it way up, and then you can correct your gamma a lot. Now that makes a lot of sense. So it's not to overdo what kind of contrast limitations you set yourself to. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Color separation isn't saturation, but it kind of sort of sets the boundaries for how the colors are present within the data. I know, you know what, I'm just not going to talk about it because it's a little bit hard to explain and I'm not sure I really understand it myself. But color boost is also not saturation. It just kind of mimics a saturation. I guess it mimics the chemicals that you would be using to develop and how much of them you use to get certain color values out of it. And I think this is nice. It's not completely necessarily needed, but if you want to use just one node, this helps make that possible. So for that, they're getting 5 stars. So that means I don't have to go down here and touch any of this stuff if I don't want to. Okay, next we have film compression. If you enable this, it compresses your highlights, and it's as simple as that. You can play with it a little bit, but it compresses your highlights to make it look more like an analog film set. And you can change the impact here. It's kind of your opacity for how it's working. I think it looks fine with the default values. You might want to change it, I don't know, but this one is a nice thing. I'm going to give them 5 stars for most of this because of their thoughtfulness and everything in here, but a lot of these aren't super necessary unless you're really going for the analog look, and this does indeed help you with that, so they're going to get 5 stars for that. Okay, so expand. This is something that you probably don't really need because there's plenty of it down here. This just changes your black and white point of the particular clip. So if any of you have ever used the blacks and whites sliders within Lightroom, this is doing essentially the same thing. However, it is helping do it only to the adjustments that are made by Dehancer rather than the entire image, which is helpful for this kinds of thing. And it's nice because you can really have a little bit more control here over what you want. So I'm going to bring these down just to sort of really get the vibe of what I wanted there. I think that looks good, and I'm going to move on. But expand, 5 stars. All right, so now we're in color head. This is the last of the effects that aren't like actual effects. They're just, these are color and image manipulation pieces. The color head is supposed to mimic what would be part of the calibration on a photo enlarger if you were using that to develop your film, or as I said earlier, the color light system used to transfer from one film to another for motion pictures. And if any of you have ever used Lightroom Classic specifically, at the very bottom you'll know there is a color calibration area. This is very similar to that, only it's a little bit more sensitive because films were quite a bit more sensitive. So if I enable this, you'll see that if I just pass a little bit, you can start to see the whole image really changes to an extreme. So now we're only at 23 and we go all the way to 50 and it's just yellow. So you want to use this carefully, but I do kind of want to bring it down a little bit because it was a cold day because of the wind, but it was a nice, you know, beginning of summer day. So I'm going to try and sort of mimic the feeling of both the cold wind and a warm summer day, if that makes any sense to you at all. And then the tone essentially is basically changing the temperature of each of the tones. So you can see here, if you want your shadows to be warmer, you can warm them up or cool them down. I'm going to make them a little bit warmer. Same with your midtones. This is going to have the biggest impact. So I am going to warm them up a little, but not too much. And then the highlight tones, I'm actually going to bring down a little bit because I want the sky to be more blue without changing the rest of the image too much. And that, I think, is a really clever, and you can change the impact here. And you can also change your effect on the overall exposure and not just the certain areas, which is nice too. So they're getting another 5 stars for this. Color head, very useful tool. Like it a lot. Okay, next we have film grain, which I am not a huge fan of. I don't really remember film that much. I mean, I do. I've seen a lot of movies, Saving Private Ryan, Lord of the Rings, all of those that were shot on film, but I don't ever really remember seeing grain in them. The only time I ever really remember seeing grain is in elementary school when they played projector stuff. And even then, I didn't really notice it that much. So anyway, they made it nice and easy with preset values in here. I prefer smaller grain if I'm going to use grain, so I will go with a larger film that has higher resolution, and I would do a lower ISO, and you can see what that does here. The grain is very minimal, and it's a lot more present in the shadows than it is the highlights. That's probably normal for a 65mm film at ISO 50. However, if you want to change it to a little more drastic 500 ISO sensitivity, you can see that it's more present. Now, this is different, completely different than the Davinci Resolve Grain plugin. This actually, to my understanding from watching Dehancer's videos, is that it creates grain based on masking of the image to find contrast and tonal range of the highlights and the shadows, and then placing grain in areas that they thought a 35mm Super 35 should have grain. Now, if you don't like that, you can go to custom. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong one. You can still go to custom at the top, and then you can change it. So you can change your size, your amount, whether there's more in the shadows or the midtones, which is really nice because a lot of films do have more grain in certain areas than others. So depending on which one you're really familiar with and trying to mimic, this is a very helpful tool. And whether your film is color negative or positive, this is really going to change how grain is viewed or was viewed at the time, which is really, really nice. And if you're using this as a Lightroom plugin and you're trying to do stills, this is very good. So they're going to get 5 stars for how they did their grain and their approach to it, rather than like Davinci just doing a grain overlay. I think this is really nice, and they're going to get 5 stars, even though I personally don't really care for grain that much. Now, one thing I do need to note, it is extremely taxing on your system So you're going to see, look at that, yeah, 7 frames per second, 7 frames per second playback. And then if you disable it, Dehancer in general is pretty taxing on the system. So, but it will speed up. So you see now we're getting regular 13 frames per second, which is better than 7. So anyway, that's grain. All right, next we have halation. Halation is something that film aficionados will be very familiar with. If you don't know what it is, I'm not going to go into too much detail because I don't want this video to get super long. But you can see some red fringing here on high contrast areas. That is halation, and it is an artifact of a lot of different films. Even with anti-halation layers in them, they still got it. This is really nice. I do think that I would use this to fit the vibe of a lot of my videos. However, I wouldn't use it super often, but they're going to get 5 stars anyway because it's really good. Look at this. They have figured out a way to mask appropriate areas and still give you a custom mode to allow you to extremely give a lot of halation. I don't know if you can see that or not. Look how much of that there is. And then your source limiter, you can scale it back. You can have some background grain across it if you have grain enabled. The smoothness increases a little bit of roll off, makes it look a little bit more natural in certain cases. Local diffusion is just the diffusion right there. See, that's a little bit of an extreme. That is something you might see in a still, but not so much in a motion picture. So then there's global diffusion, which kind of does the entire image, because even though it normally happens in high contrast areas, you're still going to see a lot of it in your highlights anyway, and this is going to do the entire thing. Whew. And then you can do a lot of this other stuff here, which I'm not super familiar with. You can sort of amplify it. I guess that's like turning up the saturation. Your hue, you can change it. Normally it would be red, but you could change it. The blue compensation, I'm not really sure. I haven't read too much on what that actually does, but then the impact is, of course, like your opacity and how much is actually there, depending on whether you want a subtle look or not. And I think this is very easy to do. This would be a lot harder to do in Davinci, even with their built-in tools for halation. This one seems to limit it more to areas that actually would have halation compared to the way Davinci does it, which saves you some masking time, depending on how much you care about wanting to replicate the authenticity of film. All right, moving on to bloom. This one's definitely getting 5 stars because I love bloom. I normally shoot almost everything with a 1/8 or a 1/4 mist filter to achieve the bloom effect, and you can see with around the highlights, it's really working really well locally in the image to where you would get the bloom effect if you were either using film or a filter. And again, it's doing it by some advanced masking to really find the areas where bloom would occur. And again, custom mode. So this is great. This makes it a lot easier than if you're doing it in Davinci on its own. And I will be using this a lot because if I forget my filter, which is all too common, I know that this has got my back and I can still get the look that I'm going for, regardless of whether I had my filter with me or not. All right, film damage. Another thing I'm not too fond of. I'm gonna let this play through. It's pretty taxing on the system as well, but you can see how subtle it is. If you're really going for a look like that, or you're doing a flashback or something like that, then it makes a lot of sense. But for me, I just don't see myself using this very often. So again, custom mode, you can do just to enable hairs, dust, scratches. I mean, wow. Not the particular look that I like to go for, but I'm going to turn all these up just so you can see what it looks like at max value. And of course you can increase these for even more, but I think now you can see here on the screen all of the scratches and dust that it makes my point. Yeah, see, really not the kind of look I'm going for unless I'm doing something very specific to like a quick reel or a flashback scene or something. But because they make it easy to use and it actually does look really good, I'll give them 5 stars again. All right, so film breath. Here we are on film breath. This is just something I probably wouldn't use that much either, but film aficionados might really like this. This is kind of where you can see it kind of adjusting the colors slightly and you can see some lines in there. I think I disabled film damage, so I don't think that, oh no, I did. Sorry, my bad. I thought that looked a little weird, but you can just kind of see some breathing. Sometimes it turns a little bit more red. Obviously you can do a custom mode on this as well and take it to the extreme. This is something that was more of an artifact of the film itself and the different conditions that you might be filming in, and to how it reacted to getting some frames getting different amounts of light than others. I personally don't use this or wouldn't use this. I just feel like you're really trying hard to replicate film at this point, which is nice that they've given you that ability, but I'm not into it. But they're going to get 5 stars for trying, and anyone wants to comment on whether they use these things or not, or have used them or like them, let me know. Maybe you have more input on the custom mode and what you'd like to see, but I'm not super into it, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but they are getting 5 stars for making it available. Okay, gate weave, another thing that I'm going to give them 5 stars for just for including it, but something that I don't particularly fancy myself either. I am going to turn this up so you can see some of this. Gate weave is essentially just the film itself moving, so you can kind of see, let me zoom it out a little bit, you might be able to see it a little bit better because it does have you see the translation here, it's an auto zoom. That is from the film itself moving around in the reel and the gate and sort of flexing as it moves over the shutter, which gives you sort of a jittery effect, almost like you didn't use your lens stabilizer or your IBIS, which isn't that hard to mimic if you actually turn those things off. And you can tell here I'm getting a really low playback, so maybe you can't really see it, but it's there, and I'm giving them 5 stars for really trying hard to replicate this film experience. But again, not something that I would use personally. I'm just mostly here for the colors and occasionally making my videos look a little bit older. Alright, Vignette. This is something I love. I add vignettes to even stuff that isn't using older analog color schemes. I just think it sort of completes a look sometimes and brings attention, obviously, to these basketball players that I want to bring attention to. And then you can kind of see warm summer day, but yet cool wind, and the colors and everything just looks good. And the vignette sort of helps accent that. And they make this pretty easy to do. It's a little bit easier in Dehancer than it is in Davinci itself, and these sliders make it very easy, and the look looks really good. It looks like film instead of being too much of an extreme, taking a lot of guesswork around it, whether you think that it looks like film or not. But also I think it has a really pleasing look to it that I would use often. So we're getting 5 stars here. Okay, so the monitor. These last ones I'm going to gang kind of together because they're features that kind of go together, but they help you. They're to help you correct these. So these false colors and clipping indicators, you can't use them at the same time. Clipping indicator will give you a red or a blue look depending on whether you're crushing or clipping your highlights, and that's nice. It is. It's nice to have it just right there in case you need it. You can always enable this in your camera, and you can enable it in Davinci Resolve as well, but this makes it specific to the analog limit for the film stocks that are present, which is a little bit different and can help you if that's the look you're going for. Same with the false color. It's sort of limited to the range that they're giving you in these film stocks, and it helps you really try to find, sorry about that, the skin tones and whether or not you're properly exposed. Obviously it doesn't look so great here. The skin tones are off because they're not well lit. You can see when they do go to the sun they turn pink like they should, but again, when you're coloring things, you're not always going to be within regular boundaries anyway, so you know, they could give you 5 stars for giving. I'm going to give them 5 stars for giving you the tools that you need specific to these film stocks. I think it's great. Now, lastly, this is the output. This is kind of like your opacity. Now, if you are doing a color space transform in a node prior to this, you would notice that it doesn't really go back to the log look, but rather the Rec 709 look, and you can sort of adjust the overall. This is like if you were to put a preset in Lightroom and then change it so that you're not getting 100% of the preset, if that makes any sense. I know that's kind of a new feature in Lightroom, so anyway, that's more or less what it's doing. Now, next, moving on to the LUT generator, I think this is something that can really help you a lot because Dehancer is quite taxing on your system. If you export this whole look as a LUT and then put it in your user LUTs file and then come back in and go to LUT and take this Dehancer right here, you'll notice that you're going to get full playback at 24 frames per second or 60 or whatever it is you're using without it giving you the jitters. So I would suggest going through Dehancer, finding the look you want, exporting the LUT, and then bringing it back in. One thing to note, it only exports color and exposure data. It does not export things like grain, because then at that point they would be just giving it away. First of all. Second of all, those are kind of specific to each clip because it needs to do the masking in the background to ensure that it's in the appropriate area. So if you want grain, you can always bring in the LUT and then add grain on top of it through Dehancer, and then you're going to get a faster playback, which just helps you in general. And that's kind of what they're doing here in the options as well. They're giving you the option to go slow with higher quality as your playback, or fast and normal, which also isn't really that fast as we've seen. And then you've just got your regular options here. So license info is how you license it. Check profiles will actually go out to the internet and find if there's any new film profiles that they've released and add them to the collection so that you can use them, which is really nice. You don't have to reinstall the whole thing. And then disable all tools will reset everything that you've done, which is helpful, but I also wish it would start that way instead of having some of this stuff enabled. So that's my review so far. Let me know how you feel about these features. I really like them. I do think that it does, within one node, help you get to a really nice look. However, yeah, I don't know. I'm I don't know where I was going with that last thought, but anyway, it helps you get to where you want to be in a really nice look within a single node. And you can apply the input transform to a variety of different things to get to the point that you want to be, and you can sort of adjust this yourself here. Like, see, I'm going to actually turn that up because I think that actually looks a little bit better than I initially set it for. Wow, I should have done that in the first place. Anyway, I like it. I think this is really a great plugin. They're doing a lot of good stuff here, and if this is something that you're interested in, go check them out, dehancer.com. All right, now really quickly, I'm actually going to do another clip. This was shot in D-Log, courtesy of my friend Sean Scott at Sean Scott Media. Go check him out on Instagram. He shot this with his Mavic Air 2S, and I just wanted to show that it looks good using a different camera selection, and it does if you get it right here. So it was Air 2S, and it is indeed in D-Log, and that is a really good correction. I think that looks really nice. This is one that was in the intro, and just really quickly, I'm going to follow their recommendation, and I'm going to choose something that's pretty popular here, like let's say Portra 400. A lot of people are using that these days, right? And then I'm going to go with the print, and since that is a still film print, we are going to go with Indira glossy paper, which is what they suggest, because sometimes the paper have their own qualities that can kind of change the look of it. Oh, let me enable it first. And that I think that looks really good, to be honest with you. Okay, so we're in log, and now we're here. No glossy paper, glossy paper. I think it looks really nice, really contrasty, and of course you can sort of push and pull this as you please. I think I would do that because that looks pretty good. maybe a little bit. Yeah, that looks, yeah, I mean, talk about quick to grade. That looks really nice. And then I would go ahead, probably enable some bloom on here, because you know I like bloom, and I also like the vignette. And wow, yeah, I think that looks really good. So this is the same clip that was in the intro, only I just kind of did it a little bit different. You can see the playback is really slow and sucky, but the ultimate deliverable looks fantastic. All right, so now that we've gone through all of those features, I'm gonna say, who is this for? And I think it's for everyone. There's a lot of different use cases for this. If you're coming from or going to a different editor and maybe you've exported a lot of different looks and they don't look quite the same in the new editor and you want to save yourself a lot of time, this would be very helpful. If you're a colorist or a small color shop doing this as work, yeah, I think this would be beneficial unless you've spent hours already creating similar looks that you like better. Also, you know, just anyone who's starting out and they want to save themselves the headache, because Davinci Resolve can be very complex or it can be very simple. This plugin, I think, does make it very simple for those who want to just, you know, grade real quick to a sort of analog color, pretty color look and push their videos out there. That's good for them. All right, now let's get to drum roll, whether I think it's worth it or not. And my honest answer to that is no. It's not a hard no, but it is a no. And that is for the simple reason that most people that are in my sort of realm of work and, you know, have maybe 700 or less subscribers on YouTube, they're taking photos, or they're just starting out in their video journey or something like that, might be a little hard pressed to pay $450 for a plugin or $400 for Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro. It just seems a little steep, especially when those programs are like $199 and $299 for the studio versions or the pro versions. Premiere will cost you a little less up front if you're doing a subscription model, but still, it's a little bit of a steep price tag for what it is. And you know, I would recommend learning Davinci Resolve as much as possible and trying to replicate those looks, and letting it be up to you whether you think it's too difficult or too time consuming, but you still want to use Davinci, and then it'll be up to you whether you want to spend the money for that or not. Now, one thing I can recommend is a light version. At this time, Davinci Resolve, or, I'm sorry, Dehancer, it's hard to say Davinci and Dehancer in the same video. I'm really sorry about that. I'm not going to cut it just because I'm sure everyone else has trouble with that too. But anyway, it's a little bit hard for me to recommend it at the full price, but they do have a light version for $199 that includes the film stocks and all of that. It includes your print film, your 63 different analog looks. It includes grain, if that's one of those things that you like, but I personally am just after the colors, and what would come with the light version is about everything that I would want. So I could recommend that because it does save a lot of time. I do think that at $200, after learning as much of Davinci as you can, and I myself have hundreds of different power grades that are all the same. Like I have some for indoor shadows, outside bright light, and some of them still don't look right in the right areas because you're moving around, maybe it's a different time of day and you have to tweak it, and then you spend hours tweaking the timeline or the clip, and it's still, you know, maybe you want to save that time. And whether or not you think that 200 is worth it, that's up to you. To me personally, if I'm cranking out 2-3 videos a week, yeah, because it's going to save you a lot of time, especially if you're working really hard like me to try and get YouTube monetization status at some point and you really want to crank videos out. Now I know I take breaks every once in a while, but you know, life happens. Anyway, I can get behind the light version, and then if there's, they do make plugins, standalone plugins for some of the other options like Gate Weave, Film Breath, and Halation. Halation is also one that I could get behind every once in a while. I don't use it that much, or I won't use it that much, and it is available in Davinci by default, so you could just go that route. but if I were to package something together, it would probably be the light version plus halation, because that would save me a lot of time and get me to some looks that I really want. Now, aside from that, I think the plugin is great. It's easy to use, it looks great, everything is very nice, it does save time. That's just the biggest gripe for me, is the price point. I think it's a little bit too expensive, and I'm sure that they'll do what they can to bring the price down. Dehancer is a full company. They have, according to their website, 13 full-time staff members, so they are actively working. This is a business for them, and they are working on they have an app that you can use. So if you're someone that does a lot of reels, a lot of TikToks and stuff like that, they have a subscription-based app that you can get, and you can make all of the videos you want with the similar effects and put them on those social media platforms if that's something that you're into. They also make plugins for the different photo editors, Capture One, Lightroom, etc. So if you're really wanting to get a film-like look for your stills, there is that option as well. And so I know that they are pulling some income in other areas, so I hope that they can work to bring the price down and make it a little bit more obtainable to the masses. So, with that being said, that is my honest opinion of the Dehancer 7 and the Dehancer 7 Pro. If you like this, please comment below, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. But I am interested genuinely to hear your thoughts on this plugin. Do you like plugins? If you do, which ones are you using? Do you like them? Do you think they're worth the money? Do you think the Dehancer is worth the money? I'm sure that they would like to hear this as well. So comment away and let me know your thoughts. And I'll leave it with that, and I'll see you next time.